Right. I think what Trump is doing, mentioning Greenland like he has and Panama Canal, is he's messaging not to the Panamanians or Denmark or you know anybody like that there or the Canadians. He's actually messaging to the Chinese.
Hello and welcome to the Americano Show. Today we're going to be talking about immigration and deportations because that's very much in the news in America at the moment, following the beginning of the second Trump presidency and a fairly breaks off approach that the Trump administration is adopting towards its immigration promises and trying to secure the border. I'm delighted to be joined by Todd Bensman, a friend of the show, I can say, and also a fellow at the Center for Immigration Studies, as well as the author of Overrun, How Joe Biden Unleashed the Greatest Immigration Crisis in US History. Todd, the first thing to talk about, I think, probably is Colombia, because there was quite a lot of drama yesterday, back and forth between the Colombian government and the White House, which ended, it seems, if the White House is to be believed, but also if most reports are to be believed, with the Colombian government and President Gustavo Petro caving quite suddenly under threat of sanctions from Donald Trump and accepting military planes with migrants being shipped back to Colombia. Is the sort of official story, is that a fair reflection of events?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, as of this moment, it may be over or it may not be over. The last I heard is that he was retaliating, Petro was retaliating with Colombia's own trade tariffs on U.S. goods. But he seemed to be capitulating in the way that he said he just doesn't like military cargo planes. How about using my presidential plane or regular passenger planes? So there may be some wriggle room there for, hey, okay, we won't send them in cargo planes. But I think Trump will hold the line even on the cargo planes. He really needs to make an example here of recalcitrant countries like Colombia that are going to need to take U.S. deportees. It's not just Colombia that is proven to be resistant, but countries all over the world don't want to take back their deportees. Number one, they're criminals, and number two is even the criminals send back remittance money. They like that cash coming back. So they're all kind of addicted to it. Chinese, uh, all the nations of Africa, Asia, the Middle East, etc., are going to have to take their people back, or this is what's going to happen. Trump is sort of he pursues sort of this ideal of the madman theory, like he's crazy. This guy could do anything, kind of a thing. And I think he uses that to his benefit. He just now did it. He just did it with Colombia. So everybody else should be on notice.
Well, you point towards the military planes being a key part of it. And certainly it seems Trump, by sending troops down to seal the border, by flying migrants back, illegal migrants back by military plane, arrested and I believe handcuffed, according to some reports, he is treating them as criminals. And this seems to be where he will butt heads with the international community, many of whom will say they shouldn't be treated like criminals. That's going to be the key point of conflict, isn't it?
Well, what people don't understand about deportation and deportation flights, especially with the class of people that they are targeting, the worst first, is that they are very prone to violence on the plane. We have seen many cases of immigrants in deportation flights tearing up the airplane on the inside, attacking ICE agents, trying to get into the pilot's compartment, refusing to get off the planes onto the tarmacs at home. And so, there's a lot of kind of rebellion that goes on these planes. And sometimes You just have to restrain them. And this particular class of people that they're targeting first are, people that have been arrested for crimes already and convicted of crimes. So they're probably even more prone to attacking cops and ripping up the airplanes. So they have to be restrained. Sorry, that's how it works.
So what you're saying is the kind of humanitarian bleating that you hear from Latin American countries, from Colombia, is actually really just an excuse because they just don't want these very dangerous and mostly unpleasant people.
Yeah, and exactly. Humanitarian bleeding. Bleating. I'm going to take that. I'm going to borrow that. But yeah, that is kind of what's going on, and I think for them it's more of a slippery slope. It's the worst first, but everybody knows that eventually it's going to be just regular non-criminal, illegally present aliens that are going to be swept up. I mean, this is just the opening seconds of the first round of a very long bout that's going to go on for 4 long years. So eventually, the United States is going to get to non-criminal aliens, and they're going to have to find a good way, a cheap way. Cargo planes are much less expensive than chartered aircraft. It's just easier to do it. And by the way, I've been on these cargo planes. They're not that bad. I don't know. I mean, okay, they're not bringing coffee to you and peanuts, but they're not that terrible. And most immigrants have already gone through weeks and months in really rough conditions on the trail. They're no strangers to a little roughness. This. I'm sorry. You're not going to get much sympathy out of me. I've flown on these cargo planes. They're fine.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about Colombia because probably a lot of our audience aren't really aware of the situation between Colombia and America, particularly vis-a-vis immigration. Was it quite deliberate from the White House to pick this fight with Colombia very early on to signal that Colombia itself was a major part of the problem?
Right. Well, remember, Colombia's president, Gustavo Petro, is a really far left character who comes from, a background of guerrilla fighting. He's a true blue socialist, leftist, communist, and he somehow rose to become the president of Colombia and has been moving his country closer to the axis of Iran, Cuba, Venezuela, away from Western orbit. And so, in that, he's going to automatically find an adversary in Donald Trump. That's a natural. They found an adversary to a certain extent in Joe Biden, even. But now that it's Donald Trump, I mean, all the gloves are off. Trump is not going to um, you know, play nicely in the sandbox with a guy like Petro. Um, Now, I do believe that we want to have good relations. We have trade. They have 17% of their trade is in exports to the United States, and we send gasoline and billions of dollars of goods to Colombia. I think it's in everybody's best interest that there not be a trade war. Plus, it could push this Petro guy further into the arms of China, Iran, Venezuela. Um, but I will say that those government officials in Colombia are very, uh, let's just say, hands off with the Gaitanista Self Defense Force of Colombia, which controls all of the drug trafficking, the cocaine trafficking, and the human smuggling through the Darien Gap. I was just in Colombia, in Gaitanista territory in August of 2024, and what I witnessed there proved to me over the course of a week in their territory that the Colombian government is completely hands off. They are allowing that paramilitary force of 8,000 complete unfettered control of that northwestern section of Colombia, which is, I would argue, completely at odds with U.S. national interests in drug trafficking and in the human trafficking through the Darien Gap. The Colombians should be for. I think the Trump administration has a lot more to be pissed off about with Colombia than just denying a couple of flights. Much more. And I would like to see the Trump administration expand its demands way beyond the Colombia accepting these flights. They need to take on the Gaitanistas and close that Darien Gap, fight them, even if it means with military force.
Well, we discussed the Darien Gap the last time you were on this show, but perhaps remind our viewers what it is, where it starts, where it ends, but also perhaps tell us a bit about, I mean, because the people coming in through the Darien Gap, perhaps from Colombia, are not Colombians necessarily. It's almost the whole of the world is coming in through that gap, is it not?
If you enjoy what we do here at Spectator TV, then why not subscribe to the magazine as well? If you subscribe today, you'll get 12 weeks for just £12, plus a free £20 John Lewis and Waitrose gift card. You can sign up at spectator.co.uk/TV offer.
Yeah, that's right. It's a roadless jungle of about, 80 miles, 60 to 80 miles, depending on where you enter, between Colombia and Panama. And it's a migrant route through which the entire world, people from 180 different countries, have crossed to the U.S. border. They have to go through that jungle route. It's controlled on the Colombian side by the Gaitanista self-defense. They're also called the Clan del Golfo, the Gulf Clan. A lot of people might know that name more. And they've been crossing by the hundreds of thousands under the Biden administration because of the open border at the U.S. have drawn them in. And the Gaitanistas and the Colombian federal government and the local municipalities have all cashed in and enabled this, as well as the United Nations and all these whole group of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, to facilitate this. And it's not just a small number; it's close to 2 million people have crossed through that jungle in the last 4 years. Now, right now, the numbers are way, way down. My sources tell me that it's 8% of what it was this time last year, which is fractional. And that's a great news story. And that's largely due to Trump and the fact that he's closed the border, the U.S. border. You're not getting in. And you may not even get through Mexico because we've got the Mexicans doing military operations to shut them down there and block them in Mexico too. So things are getting very difficult. People don't want to go through the Darien Gap because it's expensive and hard and time consuming. So that's a good thing. But the Colombians need to do more on their side to ensure that even that 8%, nobody gets through that area. And it could change at any time. At some point, 3, 4, 5 years from now, maybe it'll open back up again, the Darien Gap. So it needs to be a permanent fix, and it's got to happen by the Colombians on the Colombian side. And the Trump administration needs to make them want to do that.
Well, you say a lot of what's happening is down to the Trump administration coming in, but I think a lot of Democrats would say, and not entirely without reason, that Biden policies were finally clicking into place. Joe Biden finally started making some moves to secure the border. Too late, undoubtedly, as far as the American public is concerned, but that those policies are finally starting to take shape. Is there truth in that argument?
Yes, that is true. Republicans don't like to admit it. It doesn't fit very well with the narrative, but it's just simply true. What the Biden administration did was prepare itself for the 2024 campaign season. It just simply doesn't pay politically to have 10,000 immigrants a day crossing the border while you're campaigning against somebody like Donald Trump, who made suturing up the border his primary campaign pledge. So Biden went down, he had Mayorkas go down and the Secretary of State to Mexico City and cut a deal in December of 2023. for Mexican military operations, 35,000 troops. They put them out and they shut it down very significantly starting in January. The numbers were down by 80% crossing our border. It was probably going to be just up until the election in November, at which point Claudia Sheinbaum, the new Mexican president, lots of us expected that she would say, okay, we did our part for your campaign. You lost, but we did our part and we're done suffering. We're going to let them go. There were hundreds of thousands of immigrants trapped in southern Mexico. I was there. I spent a lot of time among them. I saw this entrapment, this enclave down in southern Mexico, interviewed the immigrants. Everybody thought that they were going to be let free finally before Trump could enter office. But then Donald Trump said something at a campaign rally that changed the whole game and made it his, which is he said to Sheinbaum, well, when I get into office, if I see that you've let everybody through, I'm going to put 25% trade tariffs on your country, all your exports, and it'll go to 50% if you still haven't done anything about it, and then 75%, and then 100%. And with that, she kept the military blockade in place. It's still in place now. And we haven't seen the 25% tariff yet in Mexico. So it looks like it worked there as well as Colombia. I guarantee you that the Mexican government is paying very close attention to what Trump just did to Colombia.
You mentioned the worst first policy, which Trump is putting into place. And Tom Homan seems to be the man enforcing this. The borders are. In some ways, though, Todd, is the worst first the easy part? Because these are obviously people who nobody wants in their country, and Americans clearly don't want in their country. They're convicted criminals, sometimes of very heinous crimes, and it's strange to think that they're not already in jail. But next will come, and it seems that the Trump administration is committed to this, next will come the removal by force, perhaps cruelly in some ways, of people who are there illegally but may not be as dangerous. And there are good humanitarian arguments against doing that.
Yeah, what's going on really is a part political, because like you said, who's against removing criminal aliens, murderers and rapists and child molesters who are in the United States illegally? But it's also partly because of infrastructure limitations. And what I mean by that is that, during the last 4 years of the Biden administration, they really systematically closed detention facilities, removed bed space from the table that are needed to detain people, families especially. They closed all the family detention units in the United States. There are none that are open, and they have to be reopened. And also, we don't have really the aircraft. That's why they're bringing cargo planes in. They're going to have to bring more aircraft to bear, detention space, and then lastly, personnel. The Biden administration chained ICE deportation officers to their desks, and the morale was so terrible that a great many of them left. Probably 1,000 deportation agents left the service, and they weren't replaced, because why are you going to replace people that you're not using? So the number is down to about 5,000 nationally. So they're going to have to, it takes time to increase that cadre. But that's why they're using DEA agents and other federal, they're drafting people from other agencies. They're bringing in military troops. All of it is to, start to repair and expand the infrastructure so that they can eventually expand the kind of categories for deportation that they really want, which are the millions that are here illegally, that came in, especially in the last 3 or 4 years. Eventually, I think in the next year or 2 years, when they get the infrastructure back up, you will start to see more systematic deportations of non-criminals of different kinds. You'll see workplace raids. You'll see families rounded up and deported together. No family separation.
How important do you think illegal migrants are to the US economy? Because an argument you hear a lot from liberals, from Democrats, is that illegal migration sort of plugs the gap at the bottom of the economy, the jobs that Americans just don't do or aren't really willing to do. How true is that? And if you are to really clamp down on illegal immigration, how big a problem is that going to be for the functioning of the economy and businesses?
Well, I think that prior to 2021, you could kind of make an argument for what you're saying, that illegal immigrants in the labor force kind of increase corporate profits. Who's not for higher share prices and bigger dividends that go along with slave labor wages, right? It's immoral, but that's beside the point. People are motivated by profit. But I think that there's a lot less study that has been done about the recent surge of more than 10 million people. That's just in the last 48 months. And so that grouping right there, I don't know that they are integrated into the labor force. What we do know is that surge of people in the last few years have been on the public welfare systems and have spent billions and billions of dollars. Some people say as much as like $1 trillion to support them, hundreds of billions of dollars to keep them in rent subsidized housing and hotels and food and clothing and pots and pans and transfer to everything to keep them afloat while they're here in all these different cities. I mean, FEMA alone spent $1.2 billion just last year in housing subsidies, and that's just one agency. So the point being is that I don't think that on the face of it, deporting the last 10 million people that came in, or a lot of them, is going to really affect anything except saving the American taxpayers a massive burden for years to come.
Well, and interesting you mentioned FEMA, which of course has been in the news recently because of the Californian fires. And FEMA, it seems, doesn't actually necessarily have the budget to deal with the many natural emergencies, natural disasters that America will face over the next few years, just as a natural part of the cycle of weather, climate, and so on. And yet they're spending such extraordinary sums housing illegal migrants.
Right. Well, I mean, it is true that these are separate cost centers. There's disaster relief is its own budget line item, but it certainly doesn't help anybody in the United States to have a couple of $1 billion going into supporting illegal immigrants. A couple of $1 billion could go a long way to helping hurricane victims in North Carolina or fire victims in California and whatever else, God forbid, happens between now and the time we can get more budget. But definitely FEMA is in the illegal immigration support business all of a sudden for the first time. FEMA isn't in the illegal immigrant support business. They just did that out of total desperation because the people that came in are not in the labor market. They're on public welfare. Not to mention, I didn't even mention, the healthcare systems and all the hospital systems that are having to pay 100% of all the costs of this, and they're all in the deep red. Different issue, different day, but FEMA should probably not be in the illegal immigration business at all.
Yes, it's quite surprising that it is. Finally, Todd, I wanted to ask you about Latin America and the Western Hemisphere more in a more geostrategic sense, because Donald Trump has talked about taking back control of the Panama Canal. It seems the administration are dead set on renaming the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. And I wonder whether this means that inevitably, because illegal migration is such a huge issue and a huge concern, as well as the flow of drugs and crime into America, inevitably America's reach, its exercise of power will expand more into Latin America than it has done under previous administrations.
Right. I think what Trump is doing, mentioning Greenland like he has and Panama Canal, is he's messaging not to the Panamanians or Denmark or you know anybody like that there or the Canadians. He's actually messaging to the Chinese, who know full well that they have been very hegemonic in penetrating, into the American sphere of influence, the backyard down there in Latin America, through business, it's soft power. And the Chinese control the entrance. The Chinese companies, state-run companies, they're not military, control the Colon entrance from the Caribbean side to the Panamanian Canal, and also the exit into the Atlantic side. And that's an espionage problem. It's an intelligence problem. And they also, control certain parts along the Panama Canal. I mean, if worse comes to worse, push comes to shove, they could sink a ship in there, or they could block it in some way, on a dime. And Trump doesn't like that. So he's just messaging, hey, I'm on to you, what you're doing, and in Greenland and in Panama and lots of other places in our sphere of influence. And we're going to start pushing back. So beware, we're firing some rounds over your bow. That's what I think is happening. And I think it's misconstrued by a lot of people because I'm not sure. I think he is purposeful in his vagueness about who he's targeting and why he's doing this. Although he has come out more recently and said it's about China.
Well, I was wondering actually, I know I said finally last time, but this time finally, I was wondering about whether you, in your experience in the Darien Gap and on the border, have you seen much evidence of Chinese involvement? Because we do read reports of it, that, well, there are Chinese illegal migrants, that may be a separate issue, but that China may be at best letting things happen, at worst possibly adding to the illegal migration problem at the southern border.
Well, I have met a lot of Chinese immigrants coming through. They're mostly young men and women, very well put together, unlimited funds. These are not dishwashers coming through from China. That's for sure. These are people that are spending very large sums of money to get here. I don't know that I could say, like some people do, that the Chinese are doing it on purpose. I think there's actually evidence that the Chinese don't like this. They control exit visas. You have to get an exit visa to leave China. And so there's evidence that, and I testified in Congress last year about the Chinese immigrants coming through and what that means. And what I told the congressional committee that I testified before is that I do believe that the Chinese government, the Beijing spy masters, would be fools not to take advantage of this to get some of their best and brightest spies into the United States. I'm almost positive that happened. We might not know for a couple of years until we catch one or two, but we will eventually catch one or two, and it'll all be revealed. So I think that there is some danger in that, but I don't think we've had almost 80,000 Chinese cross the American border and enter the United States, and they're here, and they're educated. These are people that will probably gravitate toward universities and research institutes and all of the usual places where they steal our stuff, and exfiltrate technology and cutting edge research back home. So I don't know. I think it's mixed. I think I think that partly, they're probably sending some spies in here, but they also don't want their whole population to leave without their permission permanently into the United States. They may not mind the remittance money either, coming into the economy.
If it was a functioning system, though, those sorts of migrants would be applying for H-1B visas and so on, wouldn't they?
Right, but there are caps on that and limitations. So if the American government is just letting everybody through, and all Chinese, I'm not unaware of any Chinese that have ever been repelled or expelled under the Biden administration. They're 100% allowed in. That's over now. All Chinese that we catch are going to be pushed back into Mexico at the very least. And a lot of them that are in the interior are going to be rounded up and flown back to China. And they better take them too, because look what happened to Colombia.
On that note, Todd, we'll end it. But fascinating as ever. Thank you very much for coming on to the Americano Show.
Thank you.